Fantastic. Thank you, everybody that has joined really punctually this afternoon slash evening on a Tuesday. We've got a really exciting session this afternoon where we'll be exploring earth sciences with the University of Southampton. As people make their way in from the waiting room, I just wanted to give a very quick introduction from Unifrog to say thank you for coming along and joining today, but also to point out that you have got the option to ask questions throughout today's session. So if you have got questions as we go through the content, please do pop them. You should have access to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, so you can click on there, ask any questions that you have, and then we'll leave a nice 10 to 15 minutes at the end of today's session to run through any of those questions and try and get as many answered as possible for you. I can see that those numbers now of students coming through from the waiting room are starting to settle. So I'll hand over to our fantastic panelists for today. And firstly, over to Esther from the University of Southampton. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. So a very warm welcome to everyone to this session on Explore Earth Sciences with the University of Southampton. So my name's Esther Sumner. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Southampton, and I'm also an admissions tutor. So in terms of what we've got lined up for you today, I'd like to explore with you what geoscience actually is, because you might not have come across it before. A little bit about what it's like to study at Southampton or indeed other universities, and then what's next. So what can you actually do in terms of careers in geoscience? We'll then get the perspective of some of our current students, so they'll tell you how they find it studying environmental geoscience here in Southampton. And then, as Lydia said, we'll finish off with a question and answer session. So please do, pop questions into the Q&A, and those could be, questions about these degree programs, but also if you've got questions about studying at university, applying, that kind of thing, happy to help with those as well. So I'm going to start off with what is geoscience? So geoscience is the study of the whole Earth system. So that's the land, the oceans, the atmosphere, the interior of our planet, and indeed how are all these things interconnected. And as geoscientists, we actually study the past, the present, the future of our planet, and indeed we also study other planets within our solar system. And as geoscientists, we find solutions to the challenges faced by us and our planet. And so these challenges include things like climate change in the past, looking from the past to the present and into the future. How do we develop sustainable energy solutions? How do we protect populations from geohazards? And I'm going to frame the first part of this talk around these three topics. So I'm going to start with climate change, past, present and future. And I'm sure you've all seen graphs like this one before. So what this graph is showing you, so we're going from 1850, so just before the Industrial Revolution really took off, through to the present day. And we're looking at how global temperatures have changed relative to an average for that period. And you can see that we've got this rapid increase in global temperatures. And so what does that look like on the surface of the Earth? Well, here's an example. So here's a glacier in Norway on the left. So back in 1889, you can see this Victorian gentleman in his top hat surveying this sort of large glacier extending into the valley. If we fast forward to 2010, here we've got someone else sat looking out onto the same landscape, but actually it's a really different landscape. You can barely see the glacier, and what was actually quite a barren landscape is now a lush forest. And I'm pretty sure you all know the reasons why we've got this sort of rising global temperatures. And that's because, as humans, we're putting more gases like carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And so these are greenhouse gases. As we increase their concentrations in the atmosphere, then we trap more heat and we cause basically the Earth to warm up. And the types of things that we're doing to do this, things like burning fossil fuels, deforesting the planet, food production, air travel, all of these things are putting more greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And I'm also sure that you've heard people come along and go, well, but does it really matter? Because surely global temperatures have changed throughout Earth's history. And so in the next bit of this talk, I'd like to show you that, yes, that is absolutely true. Global temperatures have changed through Earth's history, but not really at the alarming rates that we're seeing in the present day. So here's an example of how temperatures have changed during Earth's history. So we've got Antarctica today on the left-hand side. So we can summarize that as icebergs and penguins. And on the right-hand side, we've got an image or an artist's impression of what Antarctica looked like 120 million years ago back in the Cretaceous. And we can see basically we've got this much warmer climate, temperate forests. And the reason that we know this is we can go to Antarctica, we can look at the rocks there, and in those rocks we find fossils like this one. So this is the fossilized leaf of a tree fern, and this is how we know, or one of the ways that we know, how temperatures have changed throughout Earth's history. And I should say actually that Antarctica back in the Cretaceous was in exactly the same place as it is today. It was at the Earth's South Pole. So this is not really to do with, not directly to do with plate tectonics. But actually, as geoscientists, we've actually got some really neat tools in our tool set to actually understand more precisely how have global temperatures changed through Earth's history. And so as geoscientists, we can go out on ships like this one that you see here. This ship has this drilling rig, and this allows us to drill down into the layers of sediment and rock beneath the seafloor. And in those layers of sediment and rock that have accumulated through time, we find tiny little fossils like this one. So this, if you look at this scale bar, that's 1/10 of a millimeter for scale. So these are tiny, what we call microfossils. And these microfossils are actually fossilized algae. So these little algae, when they were alive, they were happily living in the surface waters of the oceans, and they were actually building their shells out of components from seawater like calcium, carbon, and oxygen. And then when these algae died, they sank to the seafloor and got basically incorporated into those layers of sediments. And so what's quite cool is we can actually take these fossils to a lab like this one, where we can measure their chemistry, and in particular, we can measure their isotopic chemistry. We can look at the ratio of different isotopes of oxygen in their shells, things like this, to actually as a measure of what was temperature like on Earth when that algae was alive. And we can use other isotopes to actually understand what were carbon dioxide levels on Earth like when that algae was alive. And what we find is that throughout Earth's history, high carbon dioxide levels correlate with high temperatures. So that's why back in the Cretaceous, we had much warmer temperatures globally, including at the Earth's South Pole. But what we also find when we do this, because we can measure how temperatures have changed on Earth through time, we kind of get a measure of rates of changes of temperature. And what we find is that current global temperatures are actually changing at a pretty alarming rate. So they're changing very, very quickly. And in fact, the only times that we're aware of in Earth history of temperatures changing at this rate is when, really quite catastrophic things like this happened. So this is 66 million years ago, where a meteorite hit the Earth's surface, wiping out about 76% of life on Earth, including things like the non-avian dinosaurs. And so in that case, actually that meteorite impact caused rapid global cooling, whereas what we're seeing in the present day is rapid global warming. But we should be worried about the rates of change of temperature at the moment. So if anyone ever says to you, but surely global temperatures have changed throughout Earth's history, so why do we care about increasing temperatures today? Well, you can say, yes, you're absolutely right. Global temperatures have changed in the past, but really not at the rate that we're seeing in the present day. And so I'm sure you've also all come across the sort of Paris 2015 climate agreement. So this was basically an agreement for countries to basically try to stop global temperatures from increasing much more than current levels. And in order to sort of meet the Paris Climate Agreement, this requires not only that we reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere, but we also actually actively need to transition to taking carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere out of the atmosphere. And that's what I've got a few slides about now. So one of the ways we can reduce global carbon dioxide emissions is to move towards sustainable energy solutions like the ones you see in this slide. So things like solar energy, wind energy, tidal energy, wave energy, geothermal energy, and hydroelectric power. And so geoscientists are involved in lots of different ways in sort of the implementation of this sort of green energy transition. And I'm just going to give you a flavour of the couple of ways in which we're involved. So one of the ways that we're involved is actually any time we want to build something like a wind turbine, we need to know what the interior of the Earth looks like. So in the example that you're looking at here, what you're looking at is basically a cross-section through the Earth's surface that's been made using sound pulses. So this is a geophysics technique. So geophysics is simply using physics to understand the Earth system. So we can send sound pulses down into the earth, and when we do that, they reflect off layers of rocks and sediments, and we can build up these nice pictures or cross sections of what's going on beneath the Earth's surface. So in the example that you're seeing here, this is the seafloor, this nice horizontal layer. This sort of really sort of rugose layer that you see here is basically rock beneath the Earth's surface, and then these pink and green and orange layers are loose sediments beneath the Earth's surface. So if we want to successfully build a wind turbine that doesn't fall over, then we want to make sure that we put the foundations of this turbine into some rock. And so to know that there's rock there, we can use these geophysics techniques to non-intrusively image what's going on beneath the Earth's surface. Another way in which geoscientists are involved in the green energy transition is actually we're really responsible for finding the materials to make the things to make that transition. So what I mean by that is if we want to make solar panels, if we want to make wind turbines, if we want to make batteries for electric cars, these are all made using elements of the periodic table that you'll be familiar with. So things like silicon, aluminium, iron, and these rare earth elements that are all over the news at the moment. And I don't know if you've thought about this before, where do the elements in the periodic table really come from, or the ones that we use in this context? Well, they come from the Earth's crust, and we find them in the Earth's crust in the form of rocks and minerals. So actually, as geoscientists, we're responsible for understanding where in the Earth's crust will we find these suitable rocks and minerals, and actually, really importantly, how do we find ways to extract them in a sort of sustainable and ethical way? Now, I also mentioned that it's not really enough to move towards sort of sustainable, more sustainable sort of green energy solutions. To meet that sort of Paris 2015 climate agreement, we also need to be actively taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And that's another thing that geoscientists are involved with. So I'm sure you've come across this idea that we can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then we can basically store it somewhere beneath the Earth's surface, so we've taken it from the atmosphere, so it's hopefully reducing the amount of global warming that we're getting from it. And the types of places beneath the Earth's surface we might use, so I should tell you, so this image, once again, we've used geophysics to understand, to image what it looked like beneath the Earth's surface. And there we can see we might have something like a depleted oil and gas reservoir where previously people have taken oil and gas out of the ground. That might be a suitable place to now go and store sort of carbon dioxide. Could be an unminable coal seam, so it could be in sort of deep aquifers beneath the Earth's surface. Now, you might be less familiar with the fact that actually we have just put a buoyant fluid beneath the Earth's surface. So what it would probably quite like to do is move upwards through the Earth and escape. And we see this, and this actually naturally occurs on Earth. So actually, in the image that you're looking at here, this is the seafloor, and all these bubbles are actually carbon dioxide basically being released sort of naturally from the seafloor, and there's an experiment going on to measure what's going on. Well, when we bury carbon dioxide beneath the Earth's surface, we actually risk basically escaping in this form. And so one of the things we do as geoscientists is we use remote sensing techniques to basically ensure that this isn't happening. Another way we're involved in carbon capture and storage as geoscientists is basically in developing new solutions. So in the image on the right here, this is my colleague, Professor Jörg Matter, and you can see that he's taking some samples from this spring water or from these pools. And so what's naturally occurring in these pools is that carbon dioxide is getting turned into stone. So what's happening here is carbon dioxide in the water in these springs is actually reacting with these rocks. So these are some kind of volcanic rocks and precipitating out this white mineral. So these are white carbonate minerals. So naturally there, you're turning carbon dioxide into stone. And so what Jörg and colleagues have done is develop techniques to speed this process up so that you can inject carbon dioxide into volcanic and mantle rocks that look a bit like this beneath the Earth's surface, and then naturally precipitate, or at a speeded up pace, precipitate out these carbonate minerals. So if you're turning your carbon dioxide into stone, you no longer have this issue of it potentially then escaping back into the atmosphere. So I guess a reminder of why we're doing this. Well, we're doing this because we've got this problem of sort of rapidly increasing temperatures on Earth. And so one of the sort of upshots of these rising global temperatures, or one of the consequences, is that we have increased extreme weather events and rising sea levels. So increased extreme weather events could be for sort of like storms and storm surges, as you see in this image. It could actually be things like droughts. But as geoscientists, we also study a wide range of natural hazards, including these sort of climate-induced hazards. So these could be things like coastal hazards. So this could be coastal flooding, coastal erosion, cliff collapses, that kind of thing. It could be flooding elsewhere. So it might be flooding inland from your coastlines. Or it might be things like landslides. So when we have lots of rain, this is something that can actually trigger landslides to occur, both at the coastline and inland. So as geoscientists, we want to understand actually, how do landslides and avalanches and things like that work? What's their dynamics? What causes them to be triggered in order to try to protect populations from them? And then as geoscientists, we also study really quite a wide range of natural hazards, many of them not related to the climate. So things like volcanic hazards. So we're responsible for actually understanding volcanoes and monitoring them. Or, for example, trying to understand how earthquakes work. So, for example, you'll be where, you get really large earthquakes at subduction zones. So what, how do they work in order to understand actually how do we protect populations from them? You'll also be aware that when we have these really large earthquakes, we can generate secondary hazards like tsunami. So I've just got an example here of some student work showing how we might approach trying to understand volcanic hazards. So on the left-hand side here, you've got this black and white photograph, and it's actually showing you some volcanoes and the lava flows coming off those volcanoes, so different lava flows coming down. So the first thing this student has done is they've looked at this sort of aerial image, and they've mapped out the different lava flows and mapped them onto this map on the right-hand side as different coloured flows. So all the different colours on this map are showing you different lava flows. They've then taken rocks, which are basically the solidified lava from different lava flows, and they've measured the chemistry of those rocks. And they've done that in order to understand a couple of different things. One is we can use that to actually understand the age of those lava flows. And that's really useful from a hazard perspective, because we can then start to understand actually how frequently a lava flows occurring in this area. But they can also measure the chemistry of those past lava flows to understand what was the chemistry of the magma chamber and how's that evolved through time and what might it do next. Are you going to have a nice runny lava flow, or are you going to have an explosive volcanic eruption? So I hope that, fairly briefly, I've just shown you how we use all different sciences to solve problems within earth sciences. So sciences like chemistry, physics, maths, biology, geology, geography. To give you a few more examples of that, so I've already established we can use geophysics, so physics, to see what the interior of the earth looks like. We can even do that to actually image tectonic plates as they subduct in order to better understand how subduction zones work and how earthquakes are generated. In terms of, for example, geography and geology, so in geography, we learn about actually what do landscapes on the surface of the earth look like? Well, we can use what we know about the modern earth surface to actually interpret the landscapes that we see in rocks in the geological record. And actually what's really cool about the geological record is you can see how those landscapes have evolved through time. So what might once have been a lake might now be a desert. And we can ask questions like, well, why has that change occurred? Biology is absolutely fundamental for understanding the history of life on Earth. So, that could be understanding big organisms, big charismatic organisms like dinosaurs and mammals, or it could be understanding those tiny little fossil algae that I showed you earlier. I also mentioned how we can use chemistry, for example, to measure ratios of isotopes in those microfossils to understand what was the temperature on Earth like when that organism was alive. Or indeed, we could use chemistry to understand actually, to look at a rock that's a solidified bit of a lava flow and understand what the chemistry of the magma chamber was like when that lava flow was erupted. So hopefully I've given you a flavour of actually how as geoscientists we try to use lots of different areas from different types of science to solve problems. And we completely appreciate that you will not have studied all of these things at A-level. So actually degrees in geoscience are really quite cool for getting a fundamental understanding of quite a lot of different sciences. So I'm now going to move on to talk about what's it like to study geosciences. So for our students here in Southampton, their home is the waterfront campus at the National Oceanography Centre, which is the building that you can see in the background of this slide. And so it's quite an unusual place. It's a little bit different to a sort of standard university. We have big ocean-going research vessels parked outside, loading and unloading. And this building is basically full of scientists and students studying everything from sort of geosciences to marine biology to chemistry, physics, just all really intent on actually how do we solve problems in the earth and ocean science realm. And then hopefully I'll show you a little bit in the next slide about some of our teaching research facilities. So in terms of what the inside of this building looks like, so we've got all sorts of different teaching laboratories like the one that you see here. So these are really practical subjects. We're home to the National Oceanographic Library, which is the largest oceanographic library in Europe. We have some very unusual teaching facilities. So we have our own survey vessel, the Callista, so we can use this to teach things like marine geophysics skills or marine biology skills. And then these two images are just showing you a couple of the 100 or so research laboratories that we have in the building that we can use to help with our teaching. So for example, this is one of my classes. They go into this sediment dynamics lab for some demonstrations. Or you've seen this image before of this chemistry lab. So this is a mass spectrometry lab where we can measure the chemistry of all sorts of different materials. And again, so students might use these facilities later on in their degrees during their research projects. And then we also have places for our students to relax. In terms of the types of degrees that we offer, I've talked generally about geoscience so far, but in terms of when you're looking at degree programs, you might see titles like earth sciences or geology or environmental geoscience. So we offer degrees in both geology and environmental geoscience. And at the bottom of this slide, just in case people are interested, I've popped some other degrees, some sort of wetter degrees that we offer in things like marine biology and oceanography. So I'm not sure if you'll be familiar when you see the term BSc. This is a 3-year undergraduate degree or a Bachelor of Science degree. When you see the term MSci, this is a 4-year undergraduate degree or integrated master's degree. So in terms of what you'd be doing on a geoscience degree, so you'd have taught modules, so you get your theory content in lectures, but straight away we get our students to start putting that into practice in practical classes, because we want to make sure that you don't just sort of understand the theory of how the Earth works, but you've got practical skills to go with that. There's lots of independent study, so that could be reading around a topic, but equally it could be that you're given some data to go away and play with and to have a look at for your next session or your next class. There's lots of fieldwork on our degree programs, and also in the later years of the degree, opportunities for independent research projects where you can really get into depth on a topic that interests you. So you may not have come across geology or environmental geoscience before. If you've not, then the sort of difference between the two is that geology really focuses on the physical Earth system, whereas environmental geoscience focuses on human interactions with the Earth system. So in the next couple of slides, I've tried to give examples of the types of topics you study on the two different degrees. There is obviously overlap between the degrees to give you an idea of which might suit you better. So geology suits people who are interested in things like volcanoes, earthquakes and seismology, geohazards more generally, paleontology, environmental and engineering geology, or if you're really interested in actually Earth's resources to make this green energy transition, or if you want lots of experience of independent fieldwork. Environmental geoscience focuses more on environmental impacts of humans on the Earth system, finding solutions to environmental challenges, things like pollution, climate change. If you're particularly interested in modern Earth surface processes and environments, you tend to get more of this in environmental geoscience than geology. We offer specific field training in using those geophysics techniques to study the subsurface, specifically to our environmental geoscience students. Or if you want oceanographic field skills. So this is something that's unique to Southampton, is that on our environmental geoscience degree, we offer either a geoscience pathway or a marine pathway. So you can choose whether your degree is more sort of terrestrially focused or more marine focused. So on the marine pathway, you'd be doing more of your field work out on boats on the sea rather than on land. This is what sort of our field work looks like. So any geoscience degree at any university will have lots and lots of field training. It's a really important part of these degree programs. So what's that look like? So we might make use of the local geology here on the south coast to take our students out for the day as part of taught modules. But we also have lots of residential field classes, usually 1 or 2 residential field classes a year, learning things like field skills, mapping skills, in the UK, also abroad, or you might be learning really specific things like actually how do you use these geophysics techniques on land or on the seafloor, or you might have a field trip that's very specific to a particular area of geoscience. So for example, here students are in Tenerife, where Tenerife is basically a group of volcanoes, and so it's a really good opportunity to study volcanology there. So I've just got a couple of slides to think about, okay, so you've studied a degree in geology and environmental geoscience, what are you actually going to go and do with that? So it's worth saying there's lots of jobs in this area because there's actually a shortage of qualified environmental geoscientists and geologists in the UK. The general types of areas that our students are tending to go into, so it might be things like hazard mitigation. So it might be things like, I guess, what we might call really exciting hazards. I'm not sure that's quite the right term for them, like volcanoes and earthquakes. Or it might be closer to home, things like coastal hazards, coastal erosion, flooding, things like that. There's lots of jobs and only be increasing numbers of jobs in carbon management and sustainable energy. So finding solutions to taking carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere, moving towards green energy solutions. There's lots of jobs and there'll only be increasing numbers of jobs in sustainable mineral extraction. So how do we find those materials to make this green transition? I've not really touched upon, but hydrogeologists ensure that we have clean water supplies. Or there's jobs in land management and remediation. So where we've polluted the Earth's surface, actually, how are we going to clean that up? And then geotechnical surveying is really using those sort of geophysics tools to image what's going on beneath the Earth's surface. And we need to do that anytime we build something on land, on the seafloor. We need to not only know what the surface of the Earth looks like, but also what's going on beneath. So I think I've probably talked for long enough. So I'm going to hand over now to two of our students, Bronwyn and Eloise, who I'm sure will introduce themselves to give you a perspective of what it's like to study environmental geoscience.
Okay, so I'm Eloise, and then this is Bronwyn, and we both are in our third year of studying environmental geoscience. And then this is our degree in photos. So the photo on the right is ours on our first field trip in 10B, where we got to know our course mates very well because we were staying in caravans and we got to cook together in the evenings. So it's quite nice to actually like use what we were learning in the lab in the field. And then on the bottom right is the fault zone from when we went to Spain. And then in the top left is we did a lot of microscope work in semester 1 of first year. And then bottom left, I think, is also another field trip, but I can't really see which one it is. But yeah. Next slide.
So there's been a lot of different highlights on our course so far. I think one of the main things that we've enjoyed is how varied it's been. So it's been very interdisciplinary. There's been elements of geology, maths, geography, chemistry. So it really has been great to kind of be able to do lots of different things in one. And this kind of links into how varied the modules have been. We've done ones on geohazards, like Esther was saying, ones about the ocean, ones that are more computer based or looking at the geology of areas. So we've really enjoyed that. You saw a couple of photos of the National Oceanography Centre, and it's a great place to study just because it does really have incredible facilities that we are able to use. So some of the best labs in the country and different things like that have been great to be able to study in. And then, yeah, we've been able to do loads of field work. We've done about 5 field trips so far, which has been great. And you really do get to know what you're learning about in a much more practical sense. So we've been able to develop like practical skills and also transferable skills across the whole course.
So the student life at Southampton is also really good. There is a number of societies, and if you can't find one that you want to take part of, you can also set up your own one. And then the halls of residence, they all have common rooms. So like there's pool tables, study areas, so that you can all go down if you want to leave your flat and go socialize with other people. And then also the sports centre, which was new. They've like regenerated the gym, not this September, like the last September. So it's really nice in there as well. And there's a lot of green spaces around campus and also Southampton. So you can go for picnics and you can also go for a nice walk down the riverside. It's a nice place to just like get some fresh air, go for a walk. And then Southampton is also like not too big of a city like London. So if you're like from somewhere small, it's quite nice to be in a city, but it's not too big to like navigate. And then there's also Portswood, which is like a local high street. So there's loads of cafes, restaurants, shops, charity shops, supermarkets, which is it's a lot closer to campus than like West Quay. So then if you want to just go to study in the cafe, it's quite easy to get to. And then there's also job opportunities around both in Southampton and part of the university. So you can be a student ambassador. You can also work in the susu shop on campus. And then also there's West Key, so there's loads of restaurants, shops you can also work at. So you don't have to worry about that.
So looking ahead to kind of the rest of our degree and beyond that, we're both starting our dissertations this year. So my research project is going to be on the removal of coastal defences in Studland Bay. So looking at the coastal defences that have been there, and the erosion that's been taking place whilst they've been there, and then looking at how that erosion changes, and how the natural environment changes as those defences are being removed. And then Eloise is doing one on, you go for it.
Mine's on volcanic hazards in Hawaii. I don't know as much details as Bronwyn yet. I'm still figuring it out, but yeah.
And then looking at our careers, some of the main things we're interested in, maybe environmental consultancy and climate policy. So they've both been topics that we've kind of looked at in our degree, especially about climate. We've done lots of geography modules relating to that. Seafloor surveying is quite a big area within our sector. So that would be something interesting to go into. And then also geohazards is something we've both really enjoyed across our course. So we'd be open to looking into things like that.
So our main top tips for university is take advantage of all the new opportunities that you get. Say yes to things that you may not have said yes to before, like even joining new societies, new sports. Just say yes to everything in Freshers Week. And then you also have to find a balance between working and also your social life. So like you have to schedule to make sure that you do get your studies done and you don't fall behind on deadlines, but you also do get to have the uni life that you would want to have. And then also batch cooking saves a lot of time. So you don't have to cook every single night. You can just cook and then you can either just have the same meal for 4 days in a row or put some in the freezer. It's up to you. And then also studying with your friends, it makes studying so much more interesting just because then you can have breaks together and you're not just like having a break by yourself.
We've found it, so we're not great at it, but we're trying our best, is keeping on top of your work as you go. So kind of after your lectures or around your lectures, keeping up with what you're doing as you go really saves you from having a mountain to climb at the end of term. So that's something we always strive to do. And also sometimes it can seem scary to be asking lots of questions, but that's what the lecturers and the staff are there for. So whether it's at the end of lectures or over emails, it's great to just ask questions because they are really knowledgeable. And when you ask questions, you find out why it's so helpful to ask questions, because you can just, they can really help you to unpick anything that you're confused on. And then also going into lectures slightly prepared is really helpful, not just going in and the first time you're seeing the content is in the lecture. If you've spent even like 10 or 15 minutes before the lecture looking at the slides and seeing what you're going to be going over, it really makes a difference to how much you can take in when you're in the lecture and help you to maximize the how productive your time is in the lecture. So I think that's everything we've got for you at the moment.
Cool, thanks guys. So I've just got a slide on, if you're interested in these kind of degrees, what you might want to do next. So I think one thing to say is, check out different universities and courses online. So there's lots of materials online for you to look at. Maybe think about attending open days, and most universities have in-person open days. Some also have virtual open days, as we do. And also, if you've not asked questions already in the Q&A, now's a good opportunity to do that. I would say if you do have questions after today that you don't get covered in the Q&A, please do feel free to email me. I always like to get emails from prospective students. If you want to come to Southampton for an open day, if you scan the QR code here, it'll give you information both about our in-person and virtual open days. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I think, and then hopefully there's some questions in the chat. So I'll hand back over to Lydia.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there are lots of questions coming through, and I'm sure now we get into the last 10 minutes, even more will come. I thought I would try and group them. There's a few that have come through that are course specific around some of the content we looked at earlier on, and then more that move into applying to university and entry requirements. One of the first questions that caught my eye was a student interested in remote sensing and Earth observation / monitoring technologies. So I don't know who would be best placed to answer this, whether current students have got experience in their courses of using those. It might not be applicable to your course, but one student would like to know, which one of those technologies do you most regularly utilise, and is it sort of a focus point of the courses at the University of Southampton?
Should I kick off with that maybe? So that remote sensing covers an awful lot of different techniques. So I can tell you actually from my own research, I make a lot of use of underwater robots to study seafloor avalanches. That's a whole topic in itself. But yeah, so there's a lot of different, so yeah, it's a huge area of science. But you saw actually in my talk, for example, simple things like aerial photographs are sort of a starting point with remote sensing techniques. But we also use a lot of things like satellite data these days to study sort of volcanoes and other processes. So I've forgotten what the actual question was. Which do we most?
Yeah, so I think we've covered part one, and then in a sort of a part of a degree at the University of Southampton, is there a big focus on using those technologies? Is it something that students will have the opportunity to do?
So I think if I sort of throw this at Bronwyn, I think you will have done a module in remote sensing and GIS. Do you want to talk about the types of things you did in that module?
Yeah, so in second year we had a module, I think it was called Exploration, Geophysics and Remote Sensing.
Sorry.
So yeah, in that module we learned about lots of different like techniques that kind of look at the subsurface, things like seismic refraction, electrical resistivity tomography. I'm sure you wouldn't have heard of many of them. I hadn't before I came to uni. But yeah, and then actually last week we were on a field trip in South Wales, and we got to use the knowledge that we'd learned in that module, and we were doing field work with those like types of surveys. So we were going out into the field and setting up like seismic refraction surveys, and we were doing GPR surveys. So you do get to put those into practice and get the knowledge of them as well in the lectures.
Fantastic. Yeah, sounds like you get that really nice balance of theory and then also the practical application and being able to go out and use all of those different technologies, which is fantastic. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of the place in Austria that William is interested in, but do you have any research opportunities around glaciers as part of any of your courses as a particular point of interest for a student on the call?
I'm going to be honest. So I'm going to answer this generally for degrees and then for Southampton. So glaciology is sometimes part of geography departments and sometimes part of sort of earth science departments. It's a very confusing system in the UK. In Southampton, the glaciology expertise is in the School of Geography and Environmental Science.
Fantastic.
Hopefully that's a quick answer to that one.
Yeah, and it's definitely where I think it points to a really sort of highlights a really good point for students that when they're looking at universities, the same course at every university will look very different. So it's really important to look at those modules and see what each individual university offers for each degree topic. There are lots of questions starting to come through around what students should be studying at A level to get onto courses and general entry requirements. What are your top tips for students that are trying to consider what they can be doing right now to put them in the best position to apply to your courses at the University of Southampton? I know it might differ course to course.
Yeah. I mean, my general advice, if you've not chosen your A-levels yet, is choose science A-levels. And people sometimes worry about, do I need to have studied sort of geology before? And in many ways, I think you get a better grounding if you study core sciences like chemistry, physics, biology, maths. But so all of these subjects will help you. And we appreciate you cannot have studied all of these subjects at A-level because you do 3 or 4 A-levels, right? And then I think one of the things that really helps is just, earth sciences is really about, get out into the real world, have a look at it, have a think about it, sort of read more generally on the topic. So, and maybe, don't try and sort of always sort of silo into particular subjects, be interested in, from the interior of the earth to the atmosphere. So I think general reading, but in terms of sort of A-levels, go for the sort of science A-levels.
Fantastic. Yeah, some really great advice. And we'll send the sort of course page links out to students tomorrow too. They'll be able to look at individual courses and their entry requirements too, because I know we're covering a wide range of different course areas today. Because we've got two current students on the call as well, there are some students trying to think about what they can be doing in advance of university, how can they stand out in applications. We've already touched on wider reading that students can be doing, but Bronwyn and Eloise, was there anything that you did sort of in the lead up to university or looking back that you wished you might have done, that perhaps you spoke about in your personal statements or really helped you with that transition from A-levels to university study? Bronwyn, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think it's always a big transition, whatever you do, because they are very different. But something that would be really helpful is this just getting down a really good study routine. There's a lot of independence at university. So if you have worked out before you come the best ways that works for you to study, and that will look different for everyone, then being able to bring them into university with you, already knowing what works, would be really helpful. So just working out the ways you can study, and then more widely than studies, maybe just gaining experience, whether it's like a part-time job or volunteering opportunities, just kind of stretching your wings, getting lots of different experience in different things, will just help you, and you'll be able to take things pretty more easily when you get to uni.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Eloise, I don't know if you've got anything extra that you'd like to add at all.
Yeah, Brian, that was pretty good. Maybe also just like managing your own time to make sure that you have time to do your studies, and then also need to make sure that you do have a life outside of university as well, like joining societies, just saying yes, basically going out.
Yeah, I think that was some really lovely advice as well during your part of the session, was when you first arrive at university, really take up all of those new opportunities. It's a great way to meet new people, and perhaps you're moving somewhere where you don't know anybody, but also really immerse yourself in the university life and everything that it's got to offer. So I thought that was really great to touch on too. With the courses that you offer, we've had a couple of questions come through around how those different modules are assessed. Is it all lecture-based, lab-based, independent study, field work? What does it look like at the University of Southampton if you're a student in earth sciences?
Should I kick off on that one? Maybe I'll kick off and then I'll ask Bronwyn or Eloise for their perspective. So I would say that the types of assessment are many and varied. In our modules, typically you'll have either 2 or 3 assessments, and those 2 or 3 assessments will normally be quite different types. So if I give an example from one of my modules, my first assessment, I want to check that students have got some core knowledge, can do certain types of calculations that they're going to need later in the module. And so we have this sort of short answer assessment under exam conditions. But then my main assessment for that module actually replicates the kind of reports that you would put together in a consultancy. So we basically look at, if I were building a wind farm out in the Solent and I needed to put a cable from that wind farm to land, how do I understand the geology, the sediment dynamics, the habitats in order to put that in an appropriate place? So that's a very applied bit of coursework. And then finally, at the end, we have a practical exam. So I think in general, you'll find a much bigger variety of assessment types than you have at college or school. But maybe if Eloise or Bronwyn wants to comment on this.
Yeah, I would say it's very varied, the way that we're assessed. So, I mean, at the moment today, we submitted like a group projects presentation and report that we did on Margam in Wales. And then now we need to do our own individual report. So it means that your group project is also there, but then it's also individual. So you're not doing everything by yourself. So it's like group work, teamwork, but then you also do get to show your individual like thoughts and opinions. I quite like the fact that it's varied, because it means you're not like reliant on one exam like A-levels, where there's just 2 exams for like the entire 2 years of your degree of A-levels. It's like just split up over multiple exams, assessments.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. We are getting towards the end of today's session, so we're going to pick one more question out. I think a lot of what we have spoken about already covers the themes in the remaining questions. But as Esther said, she's very kindly shared her email address if you've got questions you'd like to follow up with after today. Alison asked near the start of today's session whether the University of Southampton have partnerships with employers. I know graduate careers is a big focus at the moment in terms of what students can go into. Are there opportunities during their studies at Southampton for work placements perhaps, or to be able to connect with employers for those graduate opportunities?
Yeah, we have a very good career service, and they're with you not just for your degree, but for up to about 5 years after you graduate. They can help you, and they have great links to lots of different companies, employers, links to past students or alumni. And what I would say, so we don't offer a sort of sandwich year where you take a year out and go and work in industry. I have had tutees do that by pausing their studies for a year and then coming back in. But what we really, really encourage our students to do is to get some work experience in the summers, particularly after their second year or third year, when they've got a lot of sort of knowledge from the degree programme. And we can help students to find suitable places to go and do that, or indeed get in contact with our alumni to help with that.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, and I think that also points to what Bronwyn and Eloise were saying too, in terms of really tap into everything that a university has got to offer. I know the career service was something that I definitely didn't make the most of when I was a university student. So really great for students ahead of their studies to know that support network is available too. That is all, unfortunately, we've got time for today. It's been a fantastic session, really insightful and great to hear from current students at the University of Southampton as well. The recording of today's session will be shared with all students that sign up tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox, along with links to the University of Southampton's webpage. But it just leaves me to say thank you to all of the students that joined us, and a huge thank you as well to our fantastic panelists for your time this afternoon. Hopefully we'll see all of you on another Unifrog webinar soon. Have a lovely evening, everybody.